Not every game's sequel can live up to the legacy of its predecessor. Sometimes expectations are far too high, and other times a game simply misses the mark due to poor execution or outdated ideas. Today, we're looking at 5 sequels that disappointed fans and failed to capture the magic of the originals. Let's jump in. Duke Nukem 3D was a cultural phenomenon in the 90s. The game pushed many boundaries with its humour, interactivity, and unapologetic protagonist. Duke's one-liners, combined with fast-paced action and the ability to interact with the environment in novel ways, like flushing toilets or checking himself out in mirrors, set it apart from other shooters at the time. Fans eagerly awaited the next installment, which promised to push the envelope even further. But Duke Nukem Forever became infamous for its development hell. Announced in 1997, the game took over 14 years to finally release, undergoing numerous engine changes, reboots, and restarts along the way. The final product, which was released in 2011, was a disappointment to say the least. The humour felt outdated, the gameplay clunky, and the graphics were already old and dated as well. What had once been cutting edge now felt like a relic of a bygone era. Critics slammed the game for its offensive humour and shallow mechanics, and longtime fans were unhappy with the final product. The game's prolonged development only added to its legendary status, with leaked builds from earlier versions sparking curiosity about what Duke Nukem Forever might have been if it hadn't been stuck in development limbo for so long. As an article by Vice notes, the original 2001 build looked vastly different from what eventually released, leaving fans wondering about the potential the game once had, but never realised. Despite the game's failure, Duke Nukem Forever remains a fascinating piece of gaming history, representing the pitfalls of prolonged development and shifting industry standards. The Dead Space series built its legacy as a top-tier survival horror game, defined by its claustrophobic environments, scarce resources, and a chilling sense of isolation. Players took on the role of Isaac Clarke, navigating through desolate space stations while battling terrifying necromorphs. The tension was palpable, as every corner held the potential for horror, with players constantly managing limited resources. But Dead Space 3 shifted away from its horror roots, opting for a more action-heavy approach. Co-op gameplay was introduced, fundamentally altering the atmosphere altogether. Instead of surviving alone in space, players now had a partner by their side, reducing the intense sense of isolation. This shift toward action sequences sparked criticism from longtime fans who felt the series had lost its identity altogether. Interestingly, even the game's story producer Chuck Beaver later admitted that he would redo Dead Space almost completely if given the chance. Beaver expressed that the shift to co-op and action was driven by the studio's aim to expand the game to appeal to a broader audience, but this approach ultimately lost the old audience while failing to attract new players. Beaver mentioned he would have focused more on Isaac's psychological struggles, turning him into a more unreliable narrator and reworking the story to focus on Isaac's fractured mental state. The Resident Evil franchise made its name pioneering survival horror. Much like the Dead Space series, the earlier games, especially Resident Evil 1 and 2, were masterpieces of tension building, resource management, and puzzle solving. The horror was slow burning, relying on atmosphere, eerie environments, and strategic gameplay. Players weren't just fighting zombies, they were fighting for every scrap of ammo, every safe room, and every moment of calm. When Resident Evil 6 launched, Capcom wanted to appeal to a broader audience. Instead of doubling down on horror, they pivoted towards a more action-heavy approach. The game was filled with quick-time events, high-octane set pieces, and sprawling interconnected storylines that spanned continents. This radical departure from the slow-paced, tension-filled formula left fans of the earlier games feeling abandoned. As The Guardian described it, Resident Evil 6 became a globe-trotting military shooter rather than a horror game. Even Capcom acknowledged they may have gone too far. Producer Hiroyuki Kobayashi admitted that the game's development focused on making it bigger and more action-packed, which diluted the survival horror elements fans had loved for years. The game's scope was so wide that it lacked the tight focus and suspense that made previous entries in the series successful. Ultimately, Resident Evil 6 tried to be everything to everyone, but in doing so, it ended up satisfying no one. It wasn't scary enough for survival horror fans, and it wasn't polished or cohesive enough to stand alongside action blockbusters like Call of Duty. The backlash from this shift was so intense that it ultimately led Capcom to reassess the series' direction, which resulted in the more critically acclaimed return to horror with Resident Evil 7. For decades, Final Fantasy was known for its turn-based combat, deep storylines, and fantastical settings. The series prided itself on strategic battles that required careful planning, as well as a level of world building that captured the imagination of millions of players. Final Fantasy titles were traditionally single-player RPG experiences with deep, intricate mechanics. Final Fantasy XV made a dramatic departure from the series' turn-based roots. It introduced a real-time action RPG combat system and shifted to an open-world format where players could freely explore vast landscapes and complete side quests. The game felt like a road trip adventure with a group of friends, which very much divided fans. Some, of course, welcomed the change as a necessary evolution for modern gaming, while others felt that it lost the charm and depth of previous Final Fantasy titles. The introduction of real-time combat and a more casual approach to RPG mechanics left long-time fans wondering if the series had strayed too far from its core identity. The Fallout series has always been about rich storytelling, character development, and exploration. Each game provided a sprawling post-apocalyptic wasteland to explore, filled with NPCs, side quests, and decisions that shape the outcome of your journey. The series was known for its immersive single-player experiences and dark, often satirical tone. Fallout 76 marked a radical shift for the franchise, as it became an online multiplayer survival game. Instead of interacting with deep NPC characters, players interacted with other real-world players in a world largely devoid of the rich narrative content that Fallout was famous for. Base building and survival mechanics took center stage, and the shift to an online format left many fans feeling that the series had lost its core identity. Without the NPC-driven storylines and the immersion that previous titles were known for, Fallout 76 felt like a shell of the Fallout universe. The lackluster launch and now technical issues only worsened the backlash, leading Bethesda to spend years trying to course correct with patches and updates. So, while change is inevitable in long-running franchises, not every evolution leads to success. These sequels show that failure can come from trying to do too much, or not even enough. Whether it's Duke Nukem Forever failing to modernise, or Resident Evil 6 turning survival horror into a blockbuster action movie, these games remind us that staying true to a franchise's core is crucial. And with that in mind, what do you think? Do you agree with the list? Do you think there's some better examples? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you made it to the end of the video and enjoying the content, please leave a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.